Yes, Mr. Vani.
As the court pleases. My Lord, today we will be dealing with three witnesses. We've described them as similar fact witnesses as they were able to provide this honourable court with experiences that they have endured in security branch detention. As we advised, my Lord, on Friday, today will be a virtual hearing, and the court has been rigged up in order to allow transmission of the proceedings online. Because the witnesses are out of town. My Lord, the first witness is Professor Raymond Sorrell Sutner. And my Lord will see that he is present on the TV screen.
Yes.
My Lord, just to advise the court that Professor Sutner would prefer to take the affirmation rather than the oath.
Yes. May I have your full name, Professor?
My Lord, Raymond Sorrell Sutner.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, my Lord.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Vani.
My Lord, before we proceed, may we hand up the statement that has been made out by Professor Sutner. I have the original affidavit, and my Lord, we've marked it as Exhibit L9.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you. You may proceed.
As the court pleases. Professor Sutner, firstly, thank you so much for agreeing to testify this morning and to do so by way of a virtual hearing. Professor Sutner, I'm advised by my instructing attorney that you do have limited time this morning, so we will try to be as brief as we possibly can. Can we start, Professor? Can you describe to the court your current status? What are you currently doing career-wise?
I'm an independent researcher, although I am an emeritus professor at University of South Africa. But I write periodically, and currently I'm doing research towards memoirs.
And you've also authored certain books?
Yes, books on my prison experience, inside apartheid's prison, books on the ANC underground, recovering democracy in South Africa, and the Freedom Charter.
Thank you. Professor, if we can take you back to the early 1970s, can you describe to the court where you were in the early 70s and what were you doing? What was your employment at that point in time?
I was employed from 1971 until my arrest in 1975 at the University of Natal, as it was then known, in Durban, first in African Studies, and then I was a senior lecturer in law. My Lord.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, I should have asked you to first confirm that the statement that you provided to the family's representatives, and which you signed on the 20th of August 2021, do you confirm that is your statement?
I confirm that, my Lord.
Thank you. Returning to the early 1970s, can Can you describe the underground activities that you were involved in, the nature of them, and whether you were associated with any organizations at that time?
Yes, I was working underground for the ANC and the South African Communist Party, and I periodically distributed pamphlets through the mail. Some of these were official organizational statements. Some of these were written by myself. I also did other assignments when I was requested to find out certain information about location of people and things like that. And I later recruited two people into this underground unit.
And given those activities, Professor, were you aware of the quite serious risks involved in such underground work?
Yes, I was aware, and before I was recruited, I had to prepare myself for what I thought would happen to me if I engaged in such activities and I were to be captured. I was conversant with the evidence of torture that other people had experienced, and solitary confinement and a range of other things, so that I had to psychologically prepare myself by reading as much as I could and talking to as many people as I could about their experiences, so that I would know what I would face and I would be ready for it, as far as one could be.
And did you feel that you had done sufficient preparation and were ready for what security detention might have in store for you?
Well, one could not be sure, but I did whatever I could to ready myself, and when it did happen, it was familiar because I had actually heard about much of what happened to me.
If we can then turn to the circumstances of your arrest, which took place on the 17th of June 1975. Could you explain what you had been doing prior to the arrest and then describe the arrest itself?
Yes, my lord. I was distributing pamphlets in Durban and Pietermaritzburg because it was important to have it appear that these activities were not restricted just to Durban. So I went there with one of the people I'd recruited, Mr. Cooney, and I returned home around 10 o'clock. And when I drove into my driveway, some cars blocked where I was. And I didn't at first realize that was the security police. And I had a small weapon, not a gun, but a sort of a kosh, which I got ready. I don't know that I would have been able to do much with it, but then they blocked me in the driveway, and they came, there were like about 30 of them. They wouldn't let me drive the car in. They pushed the car into the garage. I think they didn't want me to reverse onto them or something like that.
Professor, when you say 10 o'clock, do you mean 10 p.m.
At night, 10 p.m. at night, yes. I was getting ready to go to sleep.
No doubt an unwelcome intrusion after a long day. Did they search your vehicle and house?
Yes, no, they searched very extensively. One of them, with these things, they are both amicable and threatening. And one of them, Major Stadler, who was a so-called expert on terrorism, leaned against the counter of the kitchen with me and talked to me in a sort of friendly way, while the others were just turning my house upside down. But it was at that stage fairly amicable.
And did they seize anything from your house and vehicle?
No, they took a lot of papers, but I was not a very, well, still am not a very tidy person with papers, so they had a lot of difficulty finding what they needed to take and what they didn't need to take, and asked them not to move this and not to move that. And so, but they still took a lot of things, and some of it relevant, and some of it I think they just got tired of the number of papers and just took them.
And would these have included pamphlets that you had been distributing?
I don't think there was much in the house of that kind, because I took great efforts to have nothing incriminating in the house. But there were one or two things that shouldn't have been there. I don't recall, but I mean, there were one or two things that were unfortunately not where they were supposed to be, but not a lot. They didn't have much evidence, find much evidence in the house. It was mainly academic things in the house.
So after the search in the house, which apparently went on for some hours, they then took you to Security Police Headquarters, which was in Fisher Street, Durban.
Yes.
Can you explain what transpired there?
Well, they questioned me extensively, but they were mainly wanting to find out with whom I was working, because they knew that their time was limited, because if people knew I was arrested, they were supposed to have disappeared. And so they kept on asking me, who are your comrades, etc. So I said, no, I was working on my own. And this went on for a long time. So I said, and what I was feeling is that it was inevitable that they were going to beat me up. So I wanted it to happen early rather than later, because I'd heard of people who held out, and then got beaten up or tortured very late, or even didn't get tortured, but they were very tired. And I wanted, if I were to be tortured, which I thought was inevitable, I wanted it to happen when I was as alert as possible and not very tired, because that would enable me to find ways of withholding what I could. You couldn't, I didn't think I couldn't say anything, but my capacity to withhold what was necessary to withhold would be greater if they were to start beating me up early. So I said things like, look, you might as well just start the torture. I'm not saying anything else. At a certain point I said that. And they made as if that's, that was a joke. They'd never heard of such a thing. And then at a certain point, they took me to point out where I had posted things. And because I wanted to pretend that I was the only one who posted things, I went to where I thought this person, Jennifer Roxburgh, had posted things. I had no idea where she had it, but they wanted to clear the post boxes so that the underground pamphlets didn't get posted. And then we went to another. I went to another number of other places where I thought Cooney had posted, and some things Cooney had come with me to Maritzburg, if I recall correctly, but then we separated. So they got these things, then they took me back. It was getting quite late, and then they continued questioning me. And at a certain point, it was fairly cordial, but at a certain point, I think it was Colonel Steenkamp then came in, and he said to me, "This is very serious." He twisted my nose, and
Professor,
when
if I
left,
can just interrupt you for
Sure.
a moment before we get on to the actual torture. Would I be correct in saying that once they had seized the illegal pamphlets, at that point you realized that your fate was effectively sealed?
well, I knew when they arrested me that my fate was sealed, that they somehow had gotten onto me. So I knew it before the pamphlets was taken. The pamphlets was, I suppose, part of the evidence, but I think the reasons for wanting the pamphlets was primarily to stop them from being posted. But but maybe it was necessary from an evidentiary point of view to have those pamphlets.
And you mentioned a bit earlier that the question of time was important,
Yes.
and that they wished to extract information about your comrades as quickly as possible. And you also say in your statement that we were not expected to hold out indefinitely, just long enough to allow the others to be alerted and to make their escape. Can you indicate approximately how long you were expected to hold out?
Well, there's no specific time, but I think that other people who were involved ought to have gone underground or left the country or something like that if they knew you were arrested. But the question was that they didn't know I was arrested, so I had to hold out till I found a way of letting them know that I had been arrested. And that happened during the torture.
Thank you. You mentioned that at a certain point during your interrogation, Colonel Steenkamp, who was then head of the security branch in Durban, came into the room and twisted your nose and shouted that this was serious. Did this perhaps signal a change in the course of the interrogation?
I think so, because shortly after that, Colonel Taylor, Andy Taylor, came into the room wearing a butcher's apron, and this is part of the theatrics of terror, state terror, I think, that he wore a butcher's apron, and then took off my glasses and said to me, "This is very serious." And I was blindfolded and taken to a lift. And must I continue describing this?
Yes, you can, but just one point of clarification. This warrant officer, later to become Colonel Andy Taylor, he's not the same as another security branch officer by the name of James Taylor. Did you ever come across a security branch officer by the name of James Taylor?
No, I don't think that's one of his names, because I think his name is something like Andrew Cavill Taylor.
Yes, no.
I've never met James Taylor.
Yeah, we're aware that they're two different Taylors, but they both happen to be with the Durban security branch in those days. But yes, Professor, please proceed.
Well, when I was taken to some room, they stripped my clothes off and put me on some table and applied electric shocks to my genitals, and I think my arm, because it was later bruised at the elbow and was in an uncomfortable position. And they kept on, and they put a gag over my mouth so that if I shouted, it would not be heard. And they applied the electric shocks, and then when they removed the gag, I would start talking. And I tried to tell them about things outside the country, Joe Slovo, things like that. And they said, no, tell us who your comrades are. And then they kept on applying the electric shocks again. And in the course of this, I'm not sure exactly of the sequence, but at a certain point, I had worked out that one of the ways of alerting the other people, Roxburgh and Cooney, to my arrest was to tell the security police that I had certain things in a storeroom adjoining an office, not my own office, in the university. And if the police were to raid the university, then everyone would know I was arrested, and that was what I wanted to do to enable the other two to escape. So at a certain point I told them that, but they kept on asking for the names. I didn't say the names, but they kept on with this for a number of hours, and a lot of obscenities and a lot of anti-Semitism, because to the security police, being Jewish and being a communist are more or less the same thing. And I don't know which was worse for them, as well as being a white traitor. So they kept on with this, and it went on. I don't know how long it went on, but it seemed to go on very long. And I can't describe the level of pain, but at the end of it, one of them said, do you want me to put on your socks? Because I was not able to do it, and he did. And I was then taken out of the room. I think that when I was out of the room, the blindfold was removed, and I found, I don't know if you want me to say anything more about the electric shocks.
Yes, if we can just pause there for a moment, Professor.
Sure.
If I can just take you back to the point where they stripped you of your clothes.
Yes.
Why do you think they did that, Professor?
Well, I think it's a very common thing in torture that they strip men and women of their clothes because it's part of the dehumanization, the sense of indignity that they want to impose on you. And I think they were conscious of this because a day or two later, one of these captains said to me, "We're not perverts." And I said he's a pervert. So I think they were aware of the fact that some of the things that they did were extremely, they were intended to be extremely humiliating, sort of a form of a sexual assault on me. And that, I think, is something which they calculated as being very humiliating. I should have mentioned that in the course of this, they said to me, if you're not careful, we're going to put the Kafirs onto you. And then an African voice said, tell the truth, man. And I think it was also, this thing of me being a white was very important for them, a special type of traitor. And they wanted me to know that if I didn't tell the truth while dealing with supposedly rational white people, then the so-called Kafirs would be put onto me, and it would be an irrational, unlimited form of violence, even though theirs was extreme.
Mm. So they were certainly trying to play mental games with you. On the question of the stripping, so there was certainly an element of degrading you as a person. In the course of the torture, did you suffer any perhaps abrasions or cuts that might have bled?
I wasn't aware of it at the time, but a couple of days later, when the torture had stopped, I had an asthma attack and I was taken to the district surgeon, and then he examined me from head to toes, and he found cuts in various places, including on my genitals. And he asked me about these things, and because I'd been brought there by the security police, I was not sure that I could be open about what had happened, because a number of district surgeons collaborated with the security police. So I just didn't tell him what had happened, really.
Yes, we'll get to your visit to the district surgeon shortly.
Sure. But I wasn't aware at the time of cuts, of
yes.
bleeding.
I only raise it, Professor, because there has been evidence before this court of other detainees being stripped, and another possible reason besides the humiliation aspect is to prevent clothes being contaminated with blood and subsequently being detected. If we could return to the electric shocks, do you recall how they were applied?
Now, I didn't know until Taylor made a statement when he was applying for amnesty, and he said it came through the dynamo of a telephone or some such thing. I didn't really understand how that worked, and I just know that there were electric shocks. I couldn't see, I was blindfolded, so I had no idea how it had happened until Taylor made these statements.
And you mentioned they had been applied to your testicles. Were they applied
Yes.
anywhere else?
You know, my elbow was very sore. So I think, and he said something about the arm. So I think it must have been there as well, but I didn't feel electric shocks there. It was just swollen and bruised afterwards.
And you mentioned the presence of someone else by the name of Captain Dreyer,
Yes.
and that he described himself as the monster of Main Street. And he also assaulted you.
Yes.
Can you describe the assault that he perpetrated on you?
Well, that was later, but at the time he was bringing in the name of an uncle of mine and my father, and he claimed to know them from Craddock. And I think all the time they want you to think, what would your family think of your being in this situation? But he later kicked me in the shins, but that was not the same session.
I see.
I don't know what he had to do with the electric shocks, because I was blindfolded, except he was talking.
Did he perhaps pull out pubic hairs and hair from your...
Yes, no, sorry, I forgot that. That was him, yes. And I think that would be why Wessels said, we are not perverts, you know.
Right. And I assume that must have been incredibly painful.
Well, you know, it was all the shocks is the main thing.
Yes.
Putting out hairs from your beard and pubic hairs is like minor compared with electric shocks. Although I can't assess, you know, what level of pain it was.
You mentioned that you could not put your socks on. Was that because you were unable to bend over at that point?
I think I was very disorientated, and they knew that from the experience, presumably, and that's why Trey, who was such a lout, offered to put on my socks. So, you know, I just think I may have been dizzy or something like that.
Professor, you then mentioned in your statement that on the second day In the evening of the second day, you were then taken to Durban North Police Station, where you were not really allowed to sleep much, and then returned to the fourth floor of Security Police Headquarters in Durban, where your second period of torture commenced. Can you describe that, please?
Yes, there was a Colonel Kutsia took me to Durban North Police Station and said, have a good rest, and tomorrow you can feel better by telling us everything. And I knew that they were not going to leave me alone. And within about an hour, a lot of these police arrived there, Taylor, someone called Hendrik, and a few others, and then they took me through to this fourth floor. And they made me stand balancing books on my arms. They called them my Bibles. One arm had something of Marx, the other one had something of Lenin. And if I fell, and I had to balance them and then squat. And if I fell down, they would hit me or pull my beard and things like that. And then they put drawing pins there so that if I fell, I would fall on drawing pins. And after a while, they said, we want you to rest so you can lie on this table. But they didn't really want me to rest. They made me bend my head up forwards in a very uncomfortable position and read from my Bible, so-called. And I remember it was very uncomfortable, but I remember I was reading the introduction of Engels to Marx's Capital, Volume 1. So they made that, they did that, and they also they were threatening me with worse things all the time. Like one of these people, I think it was this chap called Hendrik, said, we're going to put a rat on your stomach and put a bowl over the rat, so the only way of escape is through eating through your stomach. Now, some of these threats I didn't really take seriously. I thought they were just intimidation, very moronic intimidation, my lord, but I didn't, that was the sort of thing they were doing. They were threatening me with, always they would come up again with, wait till the Kaffirs get onto you and things like that.
Professor, you mentioned in your statement that Andy Taylor, who was then a warrant officer, he slapped you repeatedly on both sides of your head and stamped on your toes. Did you get the impression they were trying to avoid injuries on your face? Because typically slapping wouldn't leave injuries.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. My lord, I don't think that I think is in Taylor's statement about slapping me. I don't think it's my statement, because I don't recall Taylor slapping me. If I remember correctly, because I read the statement last night and this morning, I think that's Taylor's confession to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is a sort of very edited version of the torture. But I didn't think that they were trying to avoid visible injury, because as I'll indicate when we get to the district surgeon, there was visible injury.
Yes.
But not extreme, like cuts.
Yes.
Big cuts.
Certainly visible injury on your body, but not your face.
Yeah, I don't remember them punching me in the face or anything like that. I remember them holding holding my arm where it was bruised. They obviously knew that the electric shocks had been attached there. But otherwise, I don't think they ever hit me in the face.
Okay. At paragraph 49 of your statement, you do say that Taylor repeatedly slapped you on both sides of your head.
49, because is that not Taylor's statement? Let me just find 49, sorry.
It's on page 12.
Okay, yes, you're right, I'm sorry. It slapped me repeatedly on both sides of my head because I sat too low. Yeah, on my head. Not my head, but and people tramped on my toes. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's not a big point. Professor, you also mentioned in your statement, and you've alluded to in your evidence, that simply being Jewish was a factor that seemed to turn them even more aggressive, and you say that being Jewish in their eyes predisposed one to criminality and communism.
Yes.
Why do you think they took that view?
Well, someone once wrote that, like most racists, Dr. Verwoerd's early training was in anti-Semitism. It's like it's one of the primary forms of racism, which I experienced at various stages and made me aware of racism in general. So I think if you're a racist, you have a number of targets. Like today, the xenophobia is a form of racism that we didn't experience at that time. But I mean, it's a number of marginal groups become targets. So I'm not, I've always known it in the history of the of Afrikaner nationalism. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. Verwoerd himself was found guilty of defamation for what he wrote in a newspaper, which was in support of Nazism. Sorry, I should indicate when I make some errors that this statement is based on the statement I made to my lawyers at the time of my trial, and secondly, in my book, Inside Apartheid's Prison. But I'm getting old, so my memory sometimes lapses.
That's okay, Professor. And we certainly understand that you're being asked to recollect over several decades, which can't be easy. So it is, in fact, a very good thing that you still have those records and that you have done this writing, which is of great assistance to this court. Perhaps now we can turn to your visit to the district surgeon. In your statement, you say you had an asthma attack and you were taken to the district surgeon, Dr. Buchan. Can you describe your experience with that district surgeon?
Well, he was very professional in retrospect, and he did a very thorough examination. And but when I got there, Steenkamp was there, and he had a very threatening posture towards me. So that my first thought was not to claim my rights as a citizen who should be free from assault. My first thought was to forestall any further torture. So consequently, because I had heard before that district surgeons are, often betrayed the prisoners who were brought there if they told about torture, I didn't admit to torture, even though he saw wounds on my body, including on my genitals. And I didn't admit this because I was scared. I didn't know whether or not there would be further torture, and I preferred not to provoke it. So I didn't claim my rights, which I later did when I went in the second time. I was more experienced in terms of claiming rights, even in a very difficult situation. I just didn't want more torture there.
Yes, I think that's perfectly understandable in those tense circumstances. Nonetheless, Dr. Buchan did note various injuries and posed questions to you. Can you just give a sense of the injuries that he was noting?
Yeah, well, he would say to me, this is a fresh wound. How did it happen? And I said, I can't remember. I think I tripped or something like that. Now, what I knew is that if he was a district surgeon, he would be aware that when detainees died, it had often been said they slipped in the shower, they fell down the stairs. So I was using the language of security branch speak when there were inquests, so that he ought to have read what I was saying as a metaphor for being tortured. And I didn't say I was tortured because I was too scared. But I did hint at that possibility because I didn't know what was going to happen. In fact, he did give the report to Steenkamp, and so I didn't know what would happen.
He even noticed the scratch on your penis. Professor, would you agree that the district surgeon presumably has seen detainees before, ought to have put two and two together and realized that you were under pressure and that you had been tortured?
I thought he would realize that, and I thought that even though my answers to his questions were not to confirm torture, he should have read that I was confirming that the wound was an irregular cause, that it was caused by something other than tripping, even though I didn't say so, and he could see that I was there in the company of very fierce-looking security police.
Do you think that perhaps Dr. Buchan, not wanting to rock the boat, simply didn't take matters further when he could have?
I don't know what he could have done or what he did beyond that. I didn't, you see, what I saw him give the report, and if I recall correctly, it was a written report, so he presumably didn't have a copy for himself. So that he did not consequently have the material to be able to take it further. He handed it over to the police. So he was very cordial towards me, but I think that he didn't want to get into a confrontation with the security police. As a doctor, you must have been very clear that you don't have wounds like that just by chance.
Yes. And if in fact he had taken further, the matter further, then there would have been certain repercussions. You would have heard about it subsequently. So we can probably safely conclude that he decided not to take it further and to simply leave you in the hands of the security branch unprotected.
Yes.
Professor, can we now turn to the aftermath of your torture? You say in your statement that you, in subsequent years, you've begun to wonder whether you have come to terms with that episode in your life and whether you have sufficiently worked it through. Why did you come to that conclusion?
Well, after my torture, I was on trial, and then I went to prison for I was in prison for 8 years the first time. And I was not debriefed by a psychologist. And in some ways, being with others, we had very, very intense discussions and things like that. So I didn't actually recognize the trauma as being as much of a trauma as it was, and it's having continuing effects on me psychologically. In fact, I looked back on not so much the torture, but my first prison experience. I looked back as something fairly idyllic, that we used to sit and have tea on the cement and discuss politics and things like this. We're not supposed to, but we did. But so I didn't think of it as a very bad period. And the period of my torture, we did discuss when I first came in, but I didn't talk about it again. So it became buried in my consciousness until I wrote my prison book a long time afterwards.
You also mentioned in your statement that you did see a magistrate on 2 separate occasions, both times in the presence of the security police. And again, you saw little point in making a complaint to the magistrates.
Yes, my lord. I was very conversant with torture cases and the role of magistrates in doing nothing about reports of torture to them. And also judges in many cases when they had these cases where there were confessions. I think they would often read the confession and think, well, it's the truth, and then find a way of denying that there'd been torture. So both the lower court magistrates, but also many judges colluded, in my view, in finding a way of denying that there had been torture.
At the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, around 1997, Colonel Andrew Taylor actually applied for amnesty for the torture that he subjected you to, in which he admitted that he had applied, or rather that unnamed people administered electric shocks to you. What was your response to his application for amnesty?
Well, I thought that he was editing what had been done, and I was going to oppose the application. But he died shortly after that of cancer, if I remember correctly. So that was what I was going to oppose it. Not because I believe that no one must be forgiven for anything they've done wrong, but because A, these were extreme violations, and B, there was not the full truth. And my impression was that he didn't remember the details because he tortured so many people that he didn't remember the details. So I thought someone like this should go to jail.
Yes, and did it appear to you that he was perhaps trying to sanitize his own role, perhaps?
He did try to sanitize, but was still fairly serious to admit I think he only admits to a limited number of assaults perpetrated by himself, but he was present while the electric shocks were administered.
Yes, and he seemed to be reluctant to actually name the people who had applied the electric shocks.
Yes, he said he couldn't remember.
So he certainly was not disclosing in full, which was a requirement under the Truth Commission law. You also make the point that the security branch applied extreme degrees of torture, and they generally knew when to stop and not to go too far. What did you mean by that?
Well, when they were threatening me, was putting Africans onto me, I was interpreting that to me that they understood how to apply torture without killing you. Like Dreyer said to me, it's bad for your heart. And I think they generally did not want someone to die in their hands. But I think sometimes you can't calculate what the effect is going to be of the torture that you apply, and a person can die. I thought that I could well die, and not necessarily there and then while I was being tortured, but at some point when I was preparing for it, I was preparing myself for the possibility of dying. And because I did know that others had died.
Indeed, and you mention a few names of people who had died in the custody of the Durban Security Branch, including Joseph Mdluli, Dr. Hoosen Haffejee, and Bayampini Imzizi. Are you of the view that they had simply gone too far in the torture of those individuals?
I think that once you start assaulting someone, it's very hard to know whether they have pre-existing medical conditions that can lead to them dying, or when you're assaulting someone in an extreme way, whether that person is just going to succumb to the injuries. So that I did believe that these other people had been tortured to death. And when I read that it was other detainees claimed that Taylor was involved in the assault of Dr. Haffejee, I knew that my evidence would corroborate that.
Yes. To be clear, the Taylor involved in the torture and abuse of Dr. Haffejee was James Taylor. Although we're aware, of course, that the two Taylors did work hand in hand at the time. Professor, while we were on security branch members, do you recall whether any Indian security branch members were present during your interrogation and torture?
I was questioned in a very mild way by someone called Captain Niger, not Micah, Niger, but I don't think that black police, meaning Africans, colours and Indians, I don't think that they were allowed to play a prominent role in interrogation. Whether they were involved in torture, I can't say because I was blindfolded, but in what I saw, they were not involved in torture, but interrogation, very limited.
Because it does seem that there were certain Indian members present, even if they were not playing a prominent role, who
Yes.
Who have overlapped with the interrogation and detention of Dr. Haffejee. And these include
Yes.
Lieutenant Joseph Benjamin Munsami, Adjunct Officer Vera Naidu, and Constable Mohan Gopal and Lieutenant Shrewds Govender. So there does seem to be at least an overlap in that regard.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no, proceed.
You see, it would be more likely that Indian officers would be involved in tracking down Dr. Haffejee than in my case, where they would, if they wanted to find me, it would work better if white police officers had been trying to do it. So they probably were involved in tracking Dr. Haffejee down. That would be why I had less Indian officers involved in my case.
Yes, that certainly might be the case, but they were also, some of them were in fact present during the interrogation and torture of Dr. Haffejee.
Yes.
Professor, is anything further you would like to add before we close your evidence in chief?
No, my lord. I'm prepared to answer any further questions if I can assist in what I think is a very important investigation that this court is hearing.
Thank you, Professor. No further questions, my lord.
Thank you. Mr. MacDonald, any questions?
No, thank you, my lord.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. You may be excused.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vani, should we take a tea break?
Yes, my lord, I think it's an appropriate time for the tea break.
Let's proceed at 10 to 12.
As the court pleases.
Court is adjourned.
I just want to make sure that there was a right to this.
So the last one I said to him was,
All right.
Yes, Mr. Fani.
As the court pleases. My Lord, our next witness is also a virtual witness. We have on the screen Mr. Mohammed Timal, who will be testifying from Johannesburg. My Lord, he has made out a statement. Unfortunately, the original version of the statement is still being couriered down. We're hoping to receive it this afternoon.
Okay.
With the leave of the court, may we hand up a photocopy? And as soon as the original is with us, we will hand that up.
Okay. All right.
My Lord, we'd like to mark this exhibit as Exhibit L10.
Okay. Thank you. Can we proceed?
As the court pleases.
Please state your full names. Please state your full names.
Mohammed Timon.
Do you have any objection to take a prescribed oath? Do you have
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you have any objection to take a prescribed oath?
I would like to do an affirmative. Affirm. I have no objection.
Sorry, you have no objection?
To take an affirmative oath.
Oh, okay. Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Vanan.
As the court pleases. Mr. Timol, it's very good to see you again. And thank you so much for agreeing to testify today in this virtual hearing. Mr. Timol, can you describe to the court your current status?
I am a retired civil servant, retired 7 years ago. I presently spend more time with my family and my grandchildren.
Well, that is a wonderful preoccupation to be involved in. And previously you worked for the South African government. Can you just tell the court the last position you held?
I was a diplomat in London and before then in Brussels, Belgium.
Thank you. Am I correct in saying that you are the brother of the late Ahmed Timol, who was murdered in John Vorster Square on the 27th of October 1971?
Yes.
Mr. Timol, did you make out a statement which you signed in Johannesburg on the 13th of August 2021?
Yes, my lord.
My lord, that is the statement we've just handed up,
Yes.
photocopy as L10.
Thank you.
Mr. Timol, if we can take you back to your younger, more youthful days. You indicate in your statement that you have been politically involved since 1966. Can you indicate to the court what kind of political activities you were involved in back then?
In fact, I was involved at much earlier age, influenced by my late brother as well as the political activities that were taking place in South Africa at that time. The Rivonia trial had an impact on me, but in 1966, it was the 5th anniversary of the Republic of South Africa, which we did not support. So a day before at assembly, the school were going to put on a flagpole and raise a flag for us to sing the national anthem. The night before, a group of us removed the flagpole and to ensure that the flag will not be hoisted the following morning. And this is what actually happened. We also wrote slogans on the school wall: "Long live the ANC" and "Free Mandela." A few days later, we were detained. There were 7 of us who were detained at the by the Rudiput security branch. We were assaulted and a confession was extracted from us. We were subsequently charged under the Suppression of Communism Act, and after a negotiation process between the prosecution and our legal counsel, we pleaded guilty and we were given a suspended sentence.
So by the mid-1960s, you already had brushes with the South African police. But it was only later, if I stand to be corrected, that you decided to get involved with underground organizations working against apartheid. Is that correct?
It's true. That's correct, my lord.
And at what point did you make contact with the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party?
In 1968, at the advice of my late brother Ahmed Timor, who was in London, when I finished my matric, I went to study in the UK. And during the 3 years of my stay in the UK, from 1968 to 1971, I immersed myself to get a better understanding of apartheid and the political situation in South Africa, about the African National Congress, the South African Communist Party. My acquaintances in London were people like Esop Pahad, Aziz Pahad, and a few other known African National Congress activists. Before my departure to return to South Africa, I informed Esop Pahad that I would be interested, that I wanted to be involved in the underground activities of the African National Congress and the Communist Party on my return to South Africa. He then arranged for me to meet Dr. Dadu. In my meeting with Dr. Dadu, I informed him that I wanted to be trained, and I was determined that on my return to continue the struggle. He then arranged a training period for me, and a month before my departure from the UK, I received intensive training by Jack Hodgson on the method of preparing leaflet bombs. That is a device that is used, a bucket with leaflets in the bucket, a device manufactured with gunpowder and a detonation with a timing device. I received intensive training on the method of using leaflet bombs. I was also trained in surveillance methods. I was given books to read on interrogation and also history on the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. On the eve of my departure from London, I had a meeting with Dr. Dadu, who was a senior leader of the South African Communist Party
Sorry, Mr.
and
Timo,
the
can I just...
vice chairman of the Revolutionary Council. Sure.
Can I just interrupt you before we deal with the meeting with Dr. Dadu? In your training, was there specific instruction given on how to prepare for detention and how to deal with torture under interrogation?
Yes, my lord. We were doing training on that. It was basically reading books and discussions. In short, we were told to hold on during interrogation for as long as possible, because the South African security police would use torture methods, intimidation, threaten you, assault you. Right? But hold on as long as you can so that those members who are in your unit can get away.
Thank you. And sorry, before I interrupted you, you were dealing with your meeting with Dr. Yusuf Dadu. shortly before you returned to South Africa?
Yes, my lord. I had a meeting with Dr. Dadu, and there were two aspects in that meeting which stands out. The first was he told me that on my return to South Africa, and in my discussions with him, I had alluded before that I would go and settle in Durban to find work in Durban. Secondly, he told me that sometime in the future, someone would contact me and we'd work out the passcode, and that would be my contact to work in Durban, to do underground work in Durban. The second thing that he informed me was to tell my brother Ahmed, who had returned to South Africa already, that they were concerned that they had not heard from him for some time. And if Ahmed was not arrested and he was okay, I should then send a message to Dr. Dadu, a coded message on a postcard to Dr. Dadu in the UK. An address that he was given was of someone else and not that of Dr. Dadu. But that message, that postcard would reach Dr. Dadu.
Thank you. So in fact, you returned to South Africa on the evening of 30 September 1971, and you say in your statement that Ahmed, your brother, collected you at the airport. Did you then convey the message to your brother Ahmed?
On our drive back to Rulipur, I informed Ahmed and conveyed the message to him.
And as it turns out, on the very first morning of your return, it appears that you must have been, your hair must have been in an unruffled state, because your mother sent you to the barber for a haircut, as any good mother should. And what transpired when you returned from the barber?
My mother told me that the security branch officer was at home looking for me. It was the same security branch officer who had, over the past few years, frequented my mother, asking how I was doing in the UK and when I was going to return.
Do you recall
and the
his name?
message, he told my mother that I should report to the security police officers in Rulipur as they wanted to meet me.
And did you take advice from your brother Ahmed?
Ahmed had returned from school, and I informed him that the security branch wanted to see me, and he said I should go along and see what they had to say, which I did.
And what happened at the police station?
As I entered the security branch offices in Rulipur, this particular security branch officer recognized me, and he was the chap who used to come to my home. And the first question what he told me was that, Mohammed, have you returned from the UK? Have you returned from England? I said, yes. When did you come? I said, I came last night. And I was told that you wanted to see me. He said, no, we don't want to see you. We want to see Ahmed. So I felt that my mother probably got it wrong, that he may have mentioned Ahmed, and my mother thought it was I who he was looking for. He then continued, and he wanted to know what did I study in England and whether I was involved in any political activities, which I said I was not. He then said that please inform Ahmed that they wanted to see him. I left the security branch offices. Thereafter went home, and that evening when I met Ahmed at home, I told him that the security branch wanted to see you and not me. He looked concerned when I gave him that message.
And
The following day,
no, carry on.
the following day, later on that evening, I asked Ahmed whether he went to go and see the security branch. He confirmed he did go, and they wanted to know about his passport, and they were interested about his passport, and as he had applied for the extension of his passport. And that was all what we had discussed.
I see. So, on the 17th of October 1971, Ahmed suggested that you go to Durban. Why did he make that suggestion?
It was a Sunday evening, and when he returned home, I was already at home, and he informed me that both of us were under surveillance by the security branch, and that the following day I should take the train to Durban. And he gave me a friend of ours who was studying with me in the UK, that I should go to him and he would go me with accommodation. On the Monday morning, Ahmed, when he returned from school, he gave me some money. I then took the train from Ripot to Johannesburg and boarded the night train from Johannesburg to Durban. And that was the last time that I saw Ahmed, was on that Monday afternoon.
So then in Durban, you indicate that on the morning of 25th October 1971, while you were staying with students at a flat known as the Himalaya Heights in Warwick Street, Durban, you were apprehended. Can you describe what happened?
It was a Monday morning. At about 8:30 that morning, about 6 to 8 security policemen came to the flat. I was still sleeping. They came to the room I was sleeping in, woke me up, and asked whether I was Mohammed Timor, which I confirmed, and they told me that they came and arrest me. I was quite shocked at that particular time because I was fast asleep when they came to the flat. I was taken to the Fisher Street police station, and after waiting at the waiting room, I was then subsequently taken to one of the offices, and between 6 and 8 security policemen then started questioning me or interrogating me.
Can I just ask, Mr. Timor, at that time, were you unaware that your brother Ahmed had been arrested on the Friday night of 22nd October 1971?
I had absolutely no information that Ahmed was arrested. My family did not have a telephone at home, and no one of my relatives or family members did know how to contact me or where I was in Durban. The only person who knew where I was in Durban was Ahmed, and that contact was Jake Svarachia. He was the contact person in Durban. He was just a normal friend from Rudiport who was working in Durban.
Now, you mentioned you can't recall the names of the officers who arrested you, but you can recall the name of one of the Indian security branch officers. Do you remember his name?
Yes, my lord. His name was Lieutenant Niger.
That's spelled Naicger.
Yes, my lord.
If we can turn to your interrogation and torture at the security branch offices in Fisher Street, can you describe what happened there?
I was taken to an office at about 11 o'clock that morning, and there were between 6 and 8 security policemen, all hefty, well-built, who started questioning me and interrogating me about my activities in the UK and on my return to South Africa, who I contacted. I denied that I was involved in any political activity in the UK, and on my return, I have done absolutely nothing against the government or involved in any activities against the South African government. I was then assaulted, made to stand on a brick, on one brick, with both feet on a brick, given two big telephone directories to hold, one in my left hand and one in my right hand. And this went on for a long time. And when I relaxed, I was punched in the stomach, kicked on my leg, and basically brutalized. I was taunted, I was humiliated, and the interrogation continued. I was informed by the security branch that my brother Ahmed was detained, that they had got a big fish, and they had now got all of us.
And how long did that interrogation and abuse go on for?
It went on till about 11 o'clock at night, and thereafter I was taken to the Berea police station in Durban and locked up in a cell.
And then, according to your statement, the next morning you were taken back to the Fisher Street security branch officers. Did the interrogation and torture continue?
Yes, my lord. Apart from the standing on a brick with a telephone directory, I was also made to sit on an imaginary chair, which they called the golden chair. And when you relaxed or fell down, you were beaten up, punched around, shoved around, humiliated, taunted, and eventually, at some point on that Tuesday, I then informed them, yes, I did have training in the UK, and I gave them the details of my contact with Dr. Dadu, and who had trained me was Jack Hodgson. They then asked me lots of other questions, the details, information about my training, as well as other people that I had met in the UK, the students that I was living in the UK. This continued till that evening, and about 11 o'clock that evening, I was taken back to the Berea police station.
These repeated blows to your stomach and body, that must have induced intense pain.
Yes, it did. It was terrible. It was terrible, but I was not knocked out unconscious. I was very much in my senses, but extremely frightened. And I just had to keep brave and hold myself.
Now, you mentioned that the interrogation and the assaults carried on from Monday to Wednesday evening, but that on the Wednesday evening there was a sudden change in atmosphere. What exactly happened?
Before I come to that, I just want to mention that the security branch, the interrogators, also wanted to know who I had contacted in South Africa since my return. And all the people that I mentioned were either relatives or cousins or family members or friends. I gave their names. They were completely innocent people, but these names were extracted out from me. On the evening of Wednesday, at about 6 6 o'clock that evening, all of a sudden, there was a sudden change and there were quite a bit of movement in and out by security branch officers. At one point, I was left with only one officer, and I could not understand why the sudden change. Later, but earlier than 11 o'clock that evening, they took me back to the Beria police station.
And then on Thursday morning at about 8:30, you were presumably taken back to Fisher Street and interrogated again. And they made a threat against you about you rotting in jail. Was it at that point that you provided certain information?
What had happened, my lord, was that on the Thursday morning, three security policemen came to this with a pen, and they informed me that I've got to write down everything what I had told them, but the truth. They do not accept what I had told them. I have now an opportunity to tell them the truth. And failing to do so, I was robbed in that cell. They subsequently left me in the cell with pen and a notebook and paper. And this gave me an opportunity to collect my thoughts. That whole day, I decided I'm not going to write anything on paper because there was nothing else for me to tell. That evening, two members of the security branch came, and one by the name of Lieutenant Wessels, and they informed me they had got bad news for me, that my brother Ahmed had died. I was shocked, and I asked them what led to his death or the circumstances to his death, and they said they have no information, they're waiting for information from Pretoria. I then asked them whether it would be possible for me to attend the funeral, and they informed me that could not be possible. They subsequently left. When I was processing this information, I then realized that that Wednesday evening, when there was a sudden change of atmosphere in the interrogation room, it was because something terrible had happened to Ahmed. And that's why the atmosphere changed in that interrogation room on that Wednesday evening. The fact that they told me that Ahmed was dead, it was very difficult for me to accept, and I thought that it may be a ruse. They're trying to trap me on this matter here. But the following morning, when the security branch came and got me again from the Beria police station and take me to Fisher Street, a newspaper poster on a lamp post read, "Death plunge, Foster speaks." When I saw that newspaper poster, it reminded me of an incident that had taken place in 1964 of the death of Babla Saluji, a political detainee known to my family, we were informed that he had jumped from the 7th floor of the then Grace building in Johannesburg, the security branch head office in Johannesburg. So in my mind, that Ahmed had met a similar fate as that as Babla. When we arrived at the Fisher Street police station, the officers who had brought me there handed me over to an Indian security branch man who took me in the lift and took me to one of the floors back to the office where I was being interrogated. And in the lift, he then expressed his condolences to me, which then sort of confirmed that possibility Ahmed was dead. On that Friday, there was no interrogation. I was left there with one or two security branch officers for the whole day, and that evening they took me back to the Berea police station.
And it appears from your statement that they kept you in detention in Durban for another month. And it was only on the 30th of November 1971 that you were informed that you were going to be taken back to Johannesburg. Is that correct?
My Lord, before the 30th of November, before they took me back to Johannesburg, I was taken back to Fisher Street on one or two occasions in order to extract a statement out from me, and the person who took that statement was Andy Taylor. And in the course of taking that statement, I made a remark that it was incorrect what he was putting down. He then gave me one vicious smack and told me to shut up. That was the only occasion, that was one of the two occasions I was taken back to the Fisher Street police station. Thereafter, I was left in the police cells in solitary confinement, and on the night of the 30th of November, at about 1 a.m. in the morning, I was woken up by two security police officers. One was Lieutenant Wessels and the other one was Lieutenant Niger. They told me to take my things and they were taking me to Johannesburg. I asked them whether I could wash myself, and there was a tap outside the police station, which I washed my face. I was put in the car, handcuffed with one hand to the handrest there on just above the door, and we left. We went to another police station, and another car then joined us, joined the car that I was in, and we went via Harrismith to Johannesburg.
Can I just ask
On the morning, yeah.
just before we talk about Johannesburg, you mentioned that Andy Taylor had given you an almighty smack. Where exactly did he assault you?
On my face, on my face.
It was with an open hand, was it?
With an open hand, yes.
And did you get the impression that they were trying to avoid punching or kicking you in the face to avoid injuries, visible injuries on your face?
Definitely, I was not kicked on my face, nor was I smacked. During the first 3 days of interrogation, my face was avoided, and at no stage was I smacked or kicked or brutalized on my face or on my head.
At any point in time during your interrogation, were you asked to strip naked?
No, I was not, my lord.
Mr. Timur, I interrupted you as you were describing your arrival in Johannesburg.
I was taken to the 9th floor of John Foster Square to the offices of Colonel Crayling. Colonel Crayling was the head of the security police in Johannesburg. I was handed over to the security police there, and then Colonel Crayling instructed that I be taken to the police cells. But on the way back to Johannesburg, on the drive to Johannesburg, Niger and Wessels kept on telling me that I was going to be released and my parents are waiting for me. And this every hour or so they mentioned that I was going to be released. And but I found that I was locked up when we arrived at John Foster Square. And that was on the 1st of December 1971.
If we can just go back to your experience at John Foster Square, you mentioned that on 14 March 1971, although that really, I suppose, has to be 1972.
True.
So, my lord, that's an error in paragraph 34. You were taken to the office of Colonel Greyling, and he made a certain request. Can you describe to the court what request that was?
Colonel Greyling informed me that I was being released, and Major Fick of the Central Investigation Department, that the CID, who was investigating the death of my brother, wanted to question me. And if the CID detained me, it had nothing to do with the security branch. Thereafter, I was taken to the CID offices at John Foster Square and met up with Major Fick, who basically wanted to know whether Ahmed had any tendencies of committing suicide or whether he was mentally unstable, etc. And I informed him that Ahmed was a very normal, stable person and he would never have committed suicide. After the discussion with Major Fix and one of the other officers that was with him, they took me home to Rudiput and I was released.
Before you were released, did Colonel Greyling ask if you had any complaints?
Yes, he did ask me whether I had any complaints, my lord. I told him that during my detention in Durban, I was assaulted by the security branch, and he just swore at me and told me to leave his office.
So in total, you were held, am I right in saying, for 141 days in detention under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act?
That's right, my lord. And most of it was in solitary confinement. At least 95% of it was in solitary confinement.
And while you were in Johannesburg, you were held there without further interrogation?
Absolutely no interrogation took place, and the only reason that I can give is that because of the death of Ahmed Timur and the public and international outcry, they decided not to interrogate me, as well as because Mohammed Salim Esso, who was detained with Ahmed, was brutally tortured and was hospitalized. I think that the security police decided that they did not want to take a risk of another death in detention during that period.
Following your torture in Durban, did you have any marks or abrasions or injuries?
No, I had no marks of abrasions at all, or any injuries.
Mr. Timor, before we close up, is there anything else that you'd like to bring to the attention of this honourable court?
My lord, I consider myself fortunate to have been involved in the struggle against apartheid. I think it was a duty at that particular time, and I feel proud that I was one of the many people who have contributed to bring about democracy and freedom in South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Timor. No further questions, Your Lordship.
Mr. MacDonald?
Thank you. I have no questions, Lord.
I must thank you, Mr. Timor, for your time.
Okay.
You are excused.
Thank you, my lord.
Yes, Mr. Hoosen.
My Lord, we do have a third witness for today. She is a practicing physician, and she's advised my instructing attorney that she's only available at 2:30 this afternoon. That's a Dr. Sakura. So our proposal, my Lord, is that we adjourn for a longer lunch today and reconvene at 2:30 to deal with Dr. Sakura.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Court is adjourned.
As the court please.